Between 7:30 and 8 o'clock, Brigadier General Stephen Hurlbut received urgent messages for help. The long roll sounded, and reinforcements were dispatched to aid General Prentiss. Two infantry brigades, consisting of troops from Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, and Kentucky, quickly pushed down the Hamburg-Savannah road to reinforce Prentiss. Another brigade had already been dispatched earlier to assist General Sherman. Meanwhile, General William H. L. Wallace ordered Brigadier General John MacArthur, along with the 9th and 12th Illinois Regiments and the 50th Illinois Infantry, to join the reinforcements. They were accompanied by Willard's Battery A, 1st Illinois Light Artillery, down the River Road after Hurlbut. Simultaneously, General Wallace advanced his other two brigades and 3 artillery batteries down the eastern Corinth Road, moving south on Hurlbut's right. The reinforcements encountered Prentiss's refugees streaming northward in retreat. Despite the chaos, Hurlbut's men showed determination. Any soldier seen deserting his post would be shot, as declared by an officer in the 3rd Iowa Regiment. At 9 o'clock, General Hurlbut formed his 4,400 men on the southern and western edges of Sarah Bell's Old Cotton Field, located half a mile north of Prentiss's occupied camps. The Union line was supported by 3 artillery batteries. As the battle intensified, Captain John Myers' Ohio Cannoneers took position on the southwestern edge of the Bell Field, in front of the infantry. However, Captain Felix Robertson's Alabama battery targeted them with deadly accuracy, leading to their hasty retreat. The Confederates holding Prentiss's camps did not pose a significant threat to Hurlbut's front. Withers's division had been redirected, leaving only a weakened brigade in front of Hurlbut. Nonetheless, Hurlbut repositioned his troops, securing his sector and providing crucial time for Prentiss's survivors to regroup. Meanwhile, General Grant, having heard artillery fire upriver, suspected an attack on Lew Wallace's division. Urgent orders were sent to General Buell's army, directing Brigadier General William Nelson's division to march south towards Pittsburgh Landing. Grant boarded his headquarters steamer, the Tigris, and reached Crump's Landing. Realizing the fighting was at Pittsburgh Landing, he instructed Lew Wallace to hold his troops in readiness. While he assessed the situation, Grant arrived at Pittsburgh Landing between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, only to find a confused scene. Hundreds of idle soldiers stood in groups, awaiting orders. Grant wasted no time and instructed the field officers to organize the landing area. Meanwhile, he met with Brigadier General William Wallace, who informed Grant about the full-scale Confederate attack on the entire encampment. With an urgent need for reinforcements, Grant sent a messenger by boat to Lew Wallace, urging him to bring up his division. He also wrote additional instructions to General Nelson, urging him to move his command as fast as possible. Despite the chaos, Grant remained remarkably calm and ordered ammunition wagons to head inland. Grant then rode towards the front lines to oversee the embattled Union Army. First, he inspected Sherman's and McClernand's positions, narrowly escaping serious injury when an artillery fragment deflected off his sword scabbard. Undeterred, Grant continued to meet with his division commanders fighting on the Union center and left. By late morning, the initial Confederate drive started losing momentum as many Southern soldiers halted their advance to plunder captured Federal camps. General Johnston, upon discovering an officer looting, chastised him, reminding him that they were not there for plunder. Humorously, he picked up a tin cup and exclaimed, "Let this be my share of the spoils today." The Confederates faced serious tactical problems as well. They had resorted to massive frontal assaults on the Union right, resulting in heavy casualties and disrupted brigades. Trying to turn the tide, Johnston directed 5 brigades to attack a second line of Union camps behind Shiloh Church. Meanwhile, a new threat emerged on the Confederate right, prompting Johnston to redeploy troops to counter the Union's flank. Before noon, Confederate troops clashed head-on with Hurlbut's division and MacArthur's brigade at the Bell Farm. Chalmers's and Jackson's attacks against Colonel David Stewart's isolated Federal brigade culminated in a fierce battle. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Stewart's men valiantly defended their position for 2 hours before being forced to retreat. As Stewart retreated, Clanton's Alabama cavalry reached the Tennessee River, fulfilling Johnston's morning prophecy. As the Battle of Shiloh rages on, the Confederate Corps organization is in chaos. Their leaders are forced to divide the front into sectors to regain control. Hardee, Polk, and Bragg launch a massive assault on Sherman and McClernand, with reinforcements from Veatch. The Federals are forced to retreat to the Jones Field. Meanwhile, on the Confederate right, Chalmers and Jackson attack Stewart and MacArthur. The Federals hold their ground, but Stewart is cut off. Johnston sends Breckinridge against Hurlbut and MacArthur, but their attacks are repulsed. Sherman and McClernand counterattack, but Beauregard reorganizes around his reserve, Trabue, halting the Union advance at Wolf Field. Close quarter fighting ensues, as both sides grapple for control of McClernand's camps. At 2:30, with their ranks depleted, Sherman and McClernand are forced to retire across Tillman Branch. Albert Sidney Johnston is mortally wounded in the Confederate attacks against Grant's left. Command passes to Beauregard. Stuart retreats, causing Hurlbut and MacArthur to withdraw beyond the Bloody Pond. The Confederate right, now under Bragg, continues to press Grant's left. By 4 p.m., Chalmers turns the Union left, and Hurlbut is forced to retreat to Pittsburgh Landing. Reinforcements arrive under the command of William Wallace and Hurlbut. They encounter Prentiss's division, and together they take position behind an oak thicket. From 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., Confederate brigades charge into the dense underbrush, only to be met with a fierce storm of Federal musketry and artillery. The position becomes known as the Hornet's Nest. The Federal Reserve is sent to Hurlbut and McClernand, while Confederate artillery bombards the thicket. Southern infantry maneuvers around the Union stronghold. The rugged terrain, combined with stiff Federal resistance, slows the Confederate advance. The Corps commanders divide the front into 4 sections to regain control. Breckinridge moves to the right of the line, where Sidney Johnston provides overall leadership. However, by attempting to control individual units on this flank, Johnston loses overall coordination of his army. On the Confederate left, a massive frontal assault is launched, overrunning the Union right. McClernand's camp is captured, and horrendous casualties are inflicted upon the Federal troops. Sherman and McClernand rally their forces in Jones Field. They secure fresh soldiers and manage to reform their ranks. Countercharges are launched, and the Confederates are pushed back to the Hamburg-Purdy Road. Beauregard focuses on reorganizing his forces, while Traboway's brigade is sent to stem the Union advance on the right. The tide of battle shifts back and forth, with thousands falling on both sides. By 2:30, the Federals are pressed back into Jones Field once again. Despite the determination of both sides, the battle for control continues to be fiercely fought. The Confederates struggle to regain order, while the Union forces refuse to give ground. In the early hours of April 6, 1862, the Union forces led by General Benjamin Prentiss found themselves under attack at the Battle of Shiloh. As the sun began to rise, General William Wallace answered Prentiss's desperate pleas for assistance. 2 brigades advanced from their camps to the edge of Duncan's farm on the eastern Corinth Road. Colonel James Tuttle's brigade struck the remnants of Prentiss's shattered division, forming a defensive line to block the southern advance. They were joined by other Federal troops, totaling about 5,700 infantry and supported by artillery. The Union center, known as the Sunken Road, faced west-southwest, with Joseph Duncan's field in front of them. The Confederate forces, led by General Benjamin F. Cheatham, launched several assaults against the well-defended position. Despite heavy casualties, the Confederates could not break through the Union line. Even when Colonel Robert Shaver's brigade ran out of ammunition, their withdrawal weakened the attacking forces. Around noon, General Braxton Bragg arrived and took command. He continued to order piecemeal attacks, pushing Confederate troops into the dense thicket known as the Hornet's Nest. Confederate brigades, like Randall Gibson's, faced devastating Union fire. Despite appeals for artillery support, Bragg ordered more assaults. The brave soldiers fought on, facing death with courage. In just 2 hours, Gibson's brigade was badly damaged in futile attacks. As Colonel Shaver's brigade stepped forward, the battle raged on. Led by Lieutenant Colonel John M. Dean, the Confederate soldiers made a final push, getting dangerously close to the enemy line before being overwhelmed. The Battle of Shiloh was a desperate struggle, where bravery was shown amidst chaos. The sacrifices made by these soldiers would be remembered forever. In the midst of the chaos, Patton Anderson's Confederate brigade found itself redeployed to face the stubborn Hornet's Nest, opposite the Union center. Anderson's men pushed through the dense thicket, their officer warning them of the impossibility of advancing, but they pressed on nonetheless. Yet, like many before them, they were repulsed by the fierce Federal firestorm. From the Federal perspective, the fighting was equally fierce. Union soldiers stood their ground, repelling 4 successive Confederate attacks. The storm of bullets was nothing short of terrifying. Confederate Colonel Tuttle, revisiting the battlefield the next day, witnessed the devastating aftermath. The ground was covered in enemy dead, a testament to the ferocity of the battle. Could the Hornet's Nest defense have been broken? Perhaps, if a massed Confederate assault had been launched earlier. But as the battle unfolded, most of Johnston's army was already engaged in fierce fighting on the Confederate left. Meanwhile, Johnston became obsessed with the fighting at the Sarabelle Peach Orchard, diverting his attention from the critical Hornet's Nest. Confederate attempts to break the Union left center were in vain. Despite their best efforts, Confederate brigades refused to charge, leaving Johnston frustrated. Determined, he took matters into his own hands, leading his troops himself. With Johnston in the lead, 5 Southern brigades launched a concerted attack on the Union left. The Federal front weakened, and Hurlbut's and MacArthur's men were forced to retreat. Johnston's bravery was not without consequence. He had been mortally wounded, yet continued to inspire his troops. Unbeknownst to all, he was bleeding to death. By the time his wound was discovered, it was too late. Johnston had succumbed to his injuries. As the battle raged on, Confederate forces faced ammunition shortages, while Sherman's and McClernand's divisions formed a new front to protect crucial positions. The fall of General Johnston marked a turning point in the Battle of Shiloh, but the fighting would continue under the command of General Beauregard. This battle would go down in history as one of the bloodiest and most pivotal of the Civil War. After obtaining much-needed ammunition, the Southern left flank units regrouped and advanced towards the Union Hornets' Nest line. Meanwhile, Confederate forces on the Southern right flank faced challenges like steep ravines and stubborn resistance. Brigadier General Daniel Ruggles realized the futility of further attacks and ordered a concentrated artillery assault. As Confederate forces shifted their artillery, reports of heavy Union concentrations prompted a strategic move to the center. Individual Confederate battery commanders independently redeployed to engage the stubborn Federal defense in the Union center. Approximately 53 cannons bombarded the Hornets' Nest, aiming to break the Union resistance. Although its duration may have been exaggerated, the artillery barrage succeeded in driving off Federal batteries supporting the Hornets' Nest line. Grant's forces initiated a rapid fighting withdrawal towards Pittsburgh Landing, exposing key positions. The Confederate envelopment threatened the Union center, causing confusion among Union troops. Despite some Union troops managing to escape, the Hornets' Nest defense eventually collapsed. Confederates captured around 2,250 Union soldiers, leading to shouts of triumph. As white flags of surrender were raised, some Union soldiers continued to fight or sabotage their weapons. Generals Wallace and Prentiss, who made courageous stands, were eventually captured. The defenders of the Hornets' Nest bought precious time for the surviving Federal forces. General Grant's reports offer little insight, but the bravery of Wallace's and Prentiss's men cannot be forgotten. As darkness set in, Beauregard's Confederates faced an impending envelopment. This critical stand at the Hornets' Nest changed the tide of the battle.